Hello Year 10 and welcome to your 7th lesson now on A Christmas Carol, with today's focus being who is the ghost of Christmas present. So this does mean that we are starting the third stave on page 57 in my copy of the novella, and we are moving through this text at a really promising rate. However, if there are any moments that you are still unsure of or you need assistance with, please never hesitate to ask your class teacher, whether that is me or Mr. Paul or someone else if you're tuning in. So let's go ahead with this then. As ever, I recommend that you watch this first before you go ahead and complete the lesson activities posted to Edulink. Today, this should be Friday, so you've got some insight, some background, some knowledge and some prior information. So I just wanted to rewind for 2 minutes, if that, and just to pad out some of your contextual understanding. Now, later on in this stave, we will be meeting two very infamous figures, Ignorance and Want, who appear in childlike form. So before that happens later on, I just wanted to remind you of some of the information surrounding childhood in the Victorian era. So I would pop this in your exercise book or wherever you're writing, and I would just make a couple of notes on this just to polish this, dust this up, so you know when you read what's at stake here. Now, there was a real hypocrisy and great irony to the treatment of children in the Victorian era, in Blake's time. Now, supposedly in the Victorian era, there was this really idealised view of children and childhood, and you can see what idealised is in the keyword at the bottom right there. It's to present something as perfect, better really than reality. So lots of Victorians really like the idea of upholding the idea as children and childhood as this idealised state of freedom and innocence. Okay? But we know, and I definitely know this more than anything because I studied William Blake at A-level, and he was a great, critique, or someone that critiqued, the treatment of children in the Victorian era. Now, what was actually the case in reality was that children were often forced to work down mines, up chimneys, and in dangerous factories. Not to mention the fact that some younger individuals were sold into trades that they should not have, that were adult trades. In Blake's poem London, if you remember, there is a reference to the harlot's curse, which unfortunately is a reference to the younger members of society that were forced into prostitution. Okay, so these are dark topics, but there was just this massive contradiction between what the Victorians upheld as this idealised vision of childhood freedom and innocence and what was actually happening in real life. So before this period, there was upheld this very puritanical belief that when we are born, we as humans, when we are born into sin. And I've always found it to be largely mad to consider the idea that a small babe, freshly born, the first moment they enter the world, they are considered full of sin. And within the Old Testament and kind of the puritanical taking of that, they considered it to be due to mankind's fall from the Garden of Eden, the expulsion from paradise. And that was quite a widespread notion and a real perilous period for children. So, the earliest of children's literature, so books made for children, was often concerned with that idea of salvation, of saving children's souls, through really instruction and providing role models for their behaviour. So again, childhood was not this period of freedom and liberty. Even the very literature that children would consume would be full of sort of imperatives of what they must do and how they must act to avoid the sin, the original sin. Now, not all thinkers, of course, in Dickens and Blake's time were... It's hard to explain this. It's really A-level stuff, but I'm trying to make it nice and sort of clear for you. Not all thinkers in Blake's contemporary world believed in this hypocritical and limited view of childhood. Okay, there was a key philosopher at the time called Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and he was very vocal in rejecting the idea of children being born already corrupted or corrupt with original sin. He actually felt they were born as blank slates. Okay, they came into this world as completely blank slates. They were innately innocent, and they were only corrupted. They were only made to be sinful due to the experience of the world. You know, due to the things they were made to do up the chimneys. Okay, in the dangerous factories, down the mines that I said at the start of this lesson. Those are the things that corrupted their innocence. Okay, they were not born into corruption or sin. So I think Dickens is a firm believer in Rousseau's philosophy of childhood, because we were shown Scrooge as a child. Now, he was largely unhappy due to his living circumstances and his lack of kind of nuclear family. But he did have glimpses of escapism, as we know, in his loving relationship with his little sister, Fan. But what I'm trying to get at is children, and Dickens as a child, although sad and lonely at times, also enjoyed innocence and creativity. And it was only, as Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed, the world, society, that turns him and transformed him into what he is now. Okay, so that is some real high level stuff. I would definitely pause the video, read over the bullet points again, put them down in your own words, make sure you understand them. Okay, and sorry if I was waffling a bit there. This is some quite complex stuff that I just wanted to make sure was clear for you. Okay, on to the actual focus of the lesson. Let's move into the present, quite literally, with the Ghost of Christmas Present. Now, my students at A-level love a big idea. They love to know, okay, if we boil down this text and we try to get to the heart of what the author is trying to communicate, what is the point of the Ghost of Christmas Present? And I always say, well, you know what, there are many points. But, you know, if I had to choose one, if I had to say, okay, why is this character there? And we know that characters are tools. They are there to do something, to enact something, to present something, whether it's a theme or an idea or a message. Okay, why is he there? Well, I think this ghost, this technically third ghost in a way, we had Marley, the Ghost of Christmas Past, the Ghost of Christmas Present, okay, is extremely important because his character is utilised to display to Scrooge, and of course the contemporary Victorian reader, what Christmas was like for different people in Victorian Britain. Because think about it, up until this point, Scrooge has only really been interned in his own life. He has lived a marginalised and segregated existence. Even the last ghost's visitations were quite largely based upon, not always, but around his life and his experiences and the people that he knows. This ghost is going to broaden his perspective wider. And as I've placed in red here, he is going to highlight the multiplicity of experience in the Victorian era. Why? To remedy Scrooge's blinkered insight into the plight of the poor. He literally says in stave 1, when asked by the charitable workers whether he will donate, of course he says nothing first, but then he says, I can't afford to make idle people merry. And idle means lazy. He literally believes that the poor are destitute because they cannot be bothered to work. That is actually, unfortunately, a negative stereotype of the working classes that still exists today, okay, that need remedying. It's often lack of access to resources such as education that keep the poor from accessing the higher rungs of the social hierarchy. It's got nothing to do with them being born or being lazy. Okay? So the scenes that this ghost shows Scrooge help to elucidate, to make clear the difference, the great gap between the rich and the poor, and therefore to help reinforce those all-important themes of poverty and collective responsibility. Again, there's quite a lot there. This is quite complex stuff. I am aiming, of course, with my videos to look at the 7 up, the grade 7 up, and that's why you're here. Okay, you need to access these as well to get that greater, richer insight into the text. Okay, so you should be making notes here, pausing if you need to. Okay, so there he is in the centre once again. He's a huge figure. Okay, this ghost is going to help verbalise Dickens's message on charity and benevolence, yeah, and kindness and charity. He's quite a kind of loquacious, quite a sociable, a chatty ghost, and he has a lot to communicate. He has a really strong didactic message, does this ghost, and I think he's kind of at the centre of the narrative, kind of structurally. He's right in the middle, isn't he? Stave 3, the start of stave 3, because he has a real punchy message. It's kind of like the didactic heart of the narrative, which is of course the Christmas spirit and all of its virtues. So look at these key quotes. He has a genial face, which is like a friendly face. He has sparkling eye, once again the good old light imagery. He has a capacious breast, which is bare. You can see in the image there, he is showing some flesh, but it is for a symbolic reason. Okay, it shows his openness, his large heart, his generosity. Okay, it's got nothing to do with anything else. He is also described as a jolly giant. Okay, his size again is indicative, symbolic of his generosity, his benevolence, the charitable message he communicates. Okay, so those are some key quotes for you. Again, I would be writing these down, these ideas. Let's go. So he is the personification of the Christmas spirit. He is. Look at him. He's got holly, the green robe. Okay, he creates this scene, this generous scene, and when he first appears. So I'm in the yellow box now, and look at this quote. So when he first appears, he has set up an impressive feast of lights and food. And I just love this quote. I think it's almost over the top, but in the best way, in terms of the light imagery and language, the lexical field that's created. So it says the bright gleaming berries glistened. I mean, in one sentence there, in one simple sentence too, we have bright gleaming glistened. Okay, so a real strong, overwhelming lexical field of light. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe and ivy reflected back the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and as such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney. Just this whole section here is riddled with detail that pertains to the Christmas spirit in a metaphorical way. Okay, it's like an extended metaphor for it, and the ghost is the personification of this too. I've put a really big idea at the bottom here in blue. I think we're aiming high once again, grade 8, 9 for this. So this scene, the one above that I'm just describing, is almost hyperbolic, right? Really over the top, it's an exaggeration. It's excessive. The amounts of foods that are listed, I haven't got it up there, but it's turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, meat, pigs, sausages, oysters, pies, puddings, fruit and punch. It goes on, right? This excessive list. It's almost hedonistic, right? But that's not the point. It's actually there in its exaggerated state to contrast the frugal state of Scrooge's past Christmases. So it's to show the absolute contrast. Look at all of this and then look back at Scrooge's dark, dismal abode. Okay, not a whiff of holly there. Okay, his very sad little meagre dinner that he has by the meagre fire. Okay, so what Dickens is trying to do here through this is to demonstrate what Scrooge can afford. He can afford this abundance, not for himself. This isn't a lesson in hedonism, but for his community. He could provide so much for those without. Okay? Now, in Dickens's time, there was actually a figure, a thinker that actually believed that there was what was called surplus, a surplus population. There was too many people, and so they should be left really, or at least be left to sort of die out. And this is really dark. I'm sorry, this is really cheery for a Friday when this video is going live, but he felt there wasn't enough food and resources for a growing population. And so in a way, the government and state shouldn't aid those, the lower rungs of the hierarchy too much, because we need to even out the population. Yeah, I literally mean what I'm suggesting here. Okay, that those that weren't almost worthy of providing for themselves should be allowed to die out to even up the population. And it was called Malthusian theory. If you want to know more on that, you can look it up. I've probably not done it justice in my description there, so just give it a Google, you see what I mean. But this is exactly what Dickens is rallying against. This is an undeniable tableau and image of all of the Christmases, all of the things that Scrooge could have afforded but chose to shun, chose to neglect. Okay, so really key. The ghost has a glowing torch, and that glowing torch there is like the cornucopia, which is associated as a symbol with food and abundance, okay, with lots of food and richness. So he has that torch, he holds it up high, and when you read the extract that will be provided for you, he actually sprinkles some incense from his torch on the food of the poor to give it flavour and richness and nutrients, because that's who he focuses on, those that need it most. So the ghost is almost the absolute opposite to Malthusian views and theory. He believed that we have a responsibility to aid those that cannot provide for themselves. He also, quite interestingly, has an antique and rusted scabbard, which is where you would store your sword, like next to your hip. And the fact that it's ancient and it's rusted, it's been neglected, means that he has no need for it, for this weapon. Okay, so he also represents that quite Christmas virtue or idea of peace on earth. Lastly on this slide, the ghost of Christmas present, although he is depicted as a grown man, a grown individual, he is actually very young. He says to Scrooge, "You have never seen the likes of me before." And what it means by that is he is this year's Christmas. He is an embodiment of this year's Christmas. So he is this new Christmas. He says to Scrooge, or he asks him, whether he's known any of his more than 1,800 brothers. Okay, that's a metaphor for the Christmases that have gone since Christmas was a thing, right? So the novel was written in 1843. That means mathematically there would have been 1,842 prior Christmases. So he has a large family, so to speak, and Scrooge is not acquainted with any of them really. Okay, maybe one or two in the beginnings of his life, but he's not known any of his recent brothers, put it that way. Okay, we're nearly there. So when Scrooge meets this ghost, he's at a stage in his transformation, in his metamorphosis, where he is able to accept the spirit's presence and to show deference and sort of a willingness to learn. So I just wanted to highlight this quote. "Spirit," said Scrooge submissively, "conduct me where you will. I went forth last night in compulsion, and I have learned a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it." So the language here is so different to the language at the beginning, with the resounding bah humbug, the nothing, the exclamatives of disbelief and resistance. Okay, here he is submissive and he is willing to learn, to profit by any lesson the ghost has. Now, our last kind of final thought on grade 9. In terms of the theme of the supernatural in the novella, it's obviously key. But the supernatural's not there just to be this kind of thrill ride. Oh, wow, look at these ghosts. Oh, this one's scary. This one's funny. This one's, pretty to look at or whatever. They're not there for any superficial reason. The supernatural as a theme is actually supposed to be an extension of the real world. Okay? So although ghosts are quite literally fantastical, the ghosts have very real life lessons to impart for Scrooge and the reader. So don't be thinking that the supernatural here is just meant to thrill or entertain, even though at the time the ghost story, the Victorian ghost story, was very populist. Dickens uses that to his advantage. He knows that people were interested in ghost stories, and so he uses that medium, that genre, as a means to impart real life lessons. Okay, so really key you understand that, please. So that is everything. Again, if you need any more information, if I've given you anything that's too tricky, drop a question in the comment below or email. More than happy to help. But I just want to go all the way back to end you on this slide. Okay, why is the Ghost of Christmas Present so important? Okay, really key figure, really key that you understand who they are. They have a lot to show Scrooge, and we'll cover this in later lessons, but for now, there is your third ghost. Okay, Marley, the Ghost of Christmas Past, the Ghost of Christmas Present. Here we are on that journey, the beginning of stave 3, the heart of the narrative with its didactic message of change. Thank you for tuning in, Year 10. Have a great week.